In January of 1987, the Denver Broncos and Cleveland Browns engaged in one of the NFL's all-time classic playoff games, a game that is simply forever remembered as The Drive, a defining moment in the career of John Elway, as many at the time believed he was overhyped. But on a cold January day in 1987, he would have a chance to prove all the doubters wrong and secure his first Super Bowl appearance. But in his way was a loaded Browns team that looked to finally be on the cusp of bringing a championship to the city of Cleveland for the first time since 1964. The Browns came in as the favorite. They finished the season 12-4, which was good enough for the number one seed come playoff time, ensuring that the road to the Super Bowl in the AFC would go through the wretched, abominable stadium that was Cleveland Municipal Stadium. This place was a cesspool of mud and dog treats, and it never looked like a joyful place to be. It was a truly awful stadium. The Browns at the time were led by head coach Marty Schottenheimer, who was in his third season as the head man in Cleveland. Schottenheimer was a very conservative coach, something that many feel plagued him throughout his coaching career, as they would go on to call his style of coaching Marty Ball. But with a defense led by the likes of Clay Matthews, Chip Banks, and Hanford Dixon, they were a problem for every team they faced, and you knew when you played them in that wretched stadium in Cleveland, you were in for a very long day. And their offense was sneaky good too, led by quarterback Bernie Kosar, who many at the time believed was better than Elway, an opinion that in hindsight sounds laughable. But Bernie had some pretty good weapons around him in running back Kevin Mack, wide receivers Brian Brennan and Webster Slaughter, and Hall of Fame tight end Ozzie Newsome. The Browns season got off to a rough start, losing 2 of their first 3 games before going on an 11-2 run to end the season, locking them in as the number 1 seed in the AFC and showing that they were a clear Super Bowl contender. And in the divisional round, they would host the New York Jets, in a game that lives on in football immortality. The Browns fell down by 10 with just over 4 minutes left on the clock, but the Jets would implode like they always do, allowing Cleveland to send the game into overtime. And when that overtime wasn't enough, they went to another one, where finally, with 13 minutes left, kicker Mark Mosley, who had missed a chip shot in the first overtime, finally buried it to end the game and send the Browns on to the AFC Championship, a game that is forever remembered in Cleveland as the Marathon by the Lake. On the other side, the Broncos were the underdogs, led by head coach Dan Reeves, who was in his 6th season at the helm in Denver, and to this point, he was yet to win a playoff game, and with quarterback John Elway entering his 4th year, alongside weapons like Sammy Winder, Gerald Wilhite, and Vance Johnson, all in their prime, this looked like the year Denver could finally make some noise come playoff time. The Broncos would begin the 86 season going 8-1 in their first 9 games, allowing just 16 points per game while averaging 25 points themselves, making them the clear favorite for the number 1 seed in the AFC and showing that they were a true Super Bowl contender. But they would go just 3-4 over their final 7 games to end the season, losing the number 1 seed in the process, which was a big deal for this team as they had lost just 1 home game all year, that being to the 2-8 San Diego Chargers in a game that was a complete outlier from the rest of their season, as Elway had 4 turnovers and the Broncos would score just 3 points. Elway would go on to finish 5th in MVP voting that year, but Denver would have to settle for the number 2 seed, which did give them a bye, and come the divisional round, they would welcome the New England Patriots into Mile High Stadium, with Elway looking for his first ever career playoff win. The Patriots would give the Broncos a stiff test, but in the end, Elway and the Broncos were too much, as they would hold on to win 22-17. setting up a showdown in Cleveland with a trip to the Super Bowl on the line, and a chance for Elway to prove all the doubters who said he couldn't win the big game wrong. The game would take place on January 11th, 1987, with 80,000 people on hand in below freezing temperatures, and both defenses would come out firing early, as both teams would be forced to punt on their first possession. But Kosar would lead the Browns down the field on their second drive using a balanced attack. However, in the red zone, the Browns would nearly fall apart, as Harry Holt would drop an easy touchdown pass, and on the following play, running back Kevin Mack would fumble. However, the Browns would be able to maintain possession, and on third down, Herman Fontenot finally had enough, as he would walk into the end zone to give the Browns a 7-0 lead early. The Browns would continue to feed off their momentum, forcing another Denver punt. However, Kosar would make his first big mistake of the day, as he would throw an interception to Ricky Hundley in an awful decision by Kosar. But again, the Browns defense would hold strong, suffocating the Broncos, who would be forced to punt again. And Kosar would show his appreciation by making his biggest mistake of the day, as he throws another interception, this time to Jim Ryan, and he proceeds to take it all the way down to the Browns' 10-yard line, setting the Broncos up in the red zone. And again, the Browns defense would stand tall, forcing the Broncos to kick a field goal, a massive win for the Browns defense, who to this point was just dominating the Broncos offense. Meanwhile, Cleveland's turnover woes would continue, as this time Kevin Mack would fumble again, and the Broncos would be able to fall on top of it. And finally, Elway would spark the offense with a 33-yard run on a bad ankle, setting the Broncos up inside the Browns' 5-yard line. But the Browns defense would stiffen up again, forcing a fourth down decision from Broncos head coach Dan Reeves. He would choose to gamble on his offense, and they would reward him, as Gerald Wilhite would finally punch it in to put the Broncos on top 10-7. And after both teams were forced to punt on their next possession, the Browns would get one last chance before halftime, and Bernie Kosar would find Clarence Weathers for a massive 42-yard gain, which would set up a Mark Moseley field goal that would send the game to halftime, tied at 10. Coming out for the second half, the Browns would look to turn the pressure up on Elway, and after both teams were forced to punt to start the third, they would finally force that turnover that they had been looking for all day, as an Elway pass would result in a fantastic Mark Jackson interception, but the Browns offense would fail to capitalize, going 3 and out and handing the ball right back to Elway. Elway would lead the Broncos offense down into field goal range, where their drive would eventually stall out, and the Broncos would send Rich Karlis out to give them the lead, which he would do, as the Broncos would take a 13-10 lead. But on the Browns' next drive, Kosar would lead the Cleveland offense all the way down into the Broncos' red zone, but that drive would stall as well, and the Browns would be forced to call upon Moseley to tie the game again. And more punts would follow, as both defenses would start to clamp down on the opposition. But then, with just under 6 minutes left on the clock, Kosar would hit Brian Brennan for a 48-yard touchdown strike, as the Browns would go up 20-13 with just 5 minutes and 43 seconds left on the clock, sending Cleveland fans into a frenzy, as they could feel their first Super Bowl berth was just moments away. And on the ensuing kickoff, things would go from bad to worse for the Broncos, who would have trouble fielding the ball, a disastrous mistake that would set the Broncos offense up at their own 2-yard line. And Elway would lead the Broncos offense onto the field with a chance to etch their name into NFL history. But with the Broncos backed up to their own goal line, they were desperate for some breathing room, and they would turn to their star running back, Sammy Winder. He would be able to get them a massive first down to kickstart the drive. And now it was all on Elway to lead his team down the field against one of the most ruthless defenses in the NFL. An 11-yard run by Elway would pick up another first down, followed by two massive completions to Steve Sewell and Steve Watson. But the Browns defense would get to Elway again, setting up a massive 3rd and 18 where Elway would throw a bullet to Mark Jackson for 20 yards and a first down. And suddenly, Cleveland fans could slowly start to feel it slipping away. And after another 14-yard connection to Sewell, followed by an Elway 9-yard run, suddenly the Broncos were just 5 yards away from the end zone with 42 seconds left on the clock. And on the very next play, Elway would throw a bullet to Mark Jackson again to tie the game at 20. A remarkable drive by the Broncos against an insanely difficult opponent and one of the toughest environments in the NFL at the time. A defining moment in the career of John Elway. But the game wasn't over yet, as Cleveland would elect to run out the clock, sending the game to overtime. The Browns would get the ball to start overtime, but they had nothing left. There was no momentum on the Cleveland sideline, and their offense would go 3 and out, giving the ball right back to Elway, this time though, with a chance to win it. Elway would start by finding his tight end Orson Mobley, but on the very next play, the Broncos would avoid disaster as a screen pass was nearly intercepted. However, Elway would bounce right back, throwing a dart on 3rd down to Steve Watson, who would hold on after getting absolutely crushed on the sideline, and just like that, the Broncos were in field goal range. And after 3 straight runs, they would send kicker Rich Karlis out to win it. However, his kick would controversially go over the goalpost and be declared good by the refs, a decision that haunts Browns fans as they insist that the kick missed, and looking back at it, they may have had a point. However, they did have multiple chances to win the game down the stretch, and they failed to do so each time. The Broncos would go on to meet the New York Giants in the Super Bowl, led by head coach Bill Parcells. The Broncos would even take a 10-9 lead into the half. However, a second half collapse would see the Giants run away with a 39-20 victory. And while Elway was still years away from winning Super Bowls, he showed that he was indeed the real deal, and he was going to be a problem in this league for years to come. The following year, the Browns and Broncos would meet again with a trip to the Super Bowl on the line. This time, though, it would take place at Mile High Stadium in Denver. And again, these two teams would put on an all-time classic. And for the second year in a row, it would come down to the very end and deliver another classic moment in NFL playoff history. But that's a story for another day.